Hi, so I saw this post while scrolling through TikTok because, of course, when you go to the feminism tag, there's a whole swath of anti-feminist posts and statements and just these mendacious kind of conceptualizations of what feminism is and what it does for women. So this one post I saw expressed something that I have seen quite frequently expressed, whether it be on certain anti-feminist podcasts or pages, Instagram, TikTok, pages like that. The idea that women do not take accountability for our actions. And I am just legitimately confused by that, and I would really appreciate it if someone would just adumbrate specifically what in our lives are we not taking responsibility for. Just please elucidate for me, because I just don't understand what our supposed propensity is to avoid or shirk responsibility. What are we not taking responsibility for? I can't find any examples that specifically detail what we're not doing right. Essentially, what would you have us do differently if we were to take accountability for our actions? What actions need to be taken into account, and how can we grow? How can we be better? If you want women to take accountability, stop saying that and just explain what it is and why and how we can improve, because I'm the type of person that likes to self-evaluate continuously, that I am very strict with myself and very much someone who holds myself to a higher standard. I do like accountability. I wrote an essay on accountability, on the idea of personal responsibility, and I would love to know what I could be doing better. But yeah, I am being a little purposely obtuse and dense because I do think I have an idea as to what they're saying, especially on the basis of this specific post that I saw. Essentially, in their mind, we are blaming men, that we're not taking accountability for any number of variable mistakes that we make in our life because we say, oh, it's a man's fault, it's patriarchy's fault, that we don't see or are capable of seeing the extent to which we are at fault. That when we accomplish something that, we're great, it's us, it's entirety of our own accord and volition. Whereas if we do something wrong, it's blame men, it's blame patriarchy, it's always someone else's fault. We foist responsibility onto someone else, and then we don't look internally to self-evaluate and to ascertain what we could have done better or differently. So, fair. Let's unpack this a little bit, because I don't think that this is something that's inherent to all women. Again, it's a past generalization. I think a lot of people don't like taking accountability for their actions. I think that's just a human thing. That's not a woman thing specifically, but sure, I'll buy it. Let's go. Okay, firstly, successes. I think everyone has a right to be celebratory of their own personal successes. We're allowed to see the extent to which our own actions and capabilities contributed to this ascension, this accomplishment. I think that's great. And I think it can be argued in some capacity that it is demonstrative of empowerment, because in many cases what a woman has to do in order to accomplish something is to surmount different obstacles that are placed in her way as a result of living under patriarchal systems. That's besides the point. Regardless, there are innumerable obstacles placed in the path of a woman that do prevent her ascension to a certain role or to an accomplishment, that are in the way of her, that are not placed in front of a man, that there are demonstrable privileges that men have that allow them to accomplish something that makes it easier for them to do it, and then harder for women to do the very same thing. Again, I'm cognizant of the fact that people don't like it when you bring up privilege and the idea of privilege, and yes, some women have privileges that men don't. There's just a whole multitude of nebulous privileges, and every person kind of embodies an amalgamation of both privilege and difficulties that are foisted upon them as a result of the current culture. So essentially, women do have certain privileges in the sense if they are white or if they have generational wealth, for example, something like that maybe a man doesn't have. But all things being equal, if we're operating under that assumption, a woman has difficulties in place of her ascension that men do not have. So, for example, I can use my own self and the acquisition of an engineering degree, and the idea that I accomplished that and was able to get it. It's a great accomplishment. I have the right to say that it was great and I did it of my own volition and ability. Same thing for a man. I think it would be disingenuous to profess that there were no additional difficulties or burdens that I had to contend with as a result of being a woman in a masculine or traditionally masculine coded field. Things that essentially my male counterparts didn't have to deal with, and that they were even cognizant of going through college and in the field itself. So, for example, the attainment of that degree did require a bit of empowerment in me, in the ability to see myself attaining that and essentially rising above or surmounting these obstacles that society has placed in front of me. For example, I didn't have a lot of this growing up as a child, but a lot of individuals that I knew, a lot of women that were in my classes, were not raised to be good at science or math, that they were told explicitly that this was not something that they should engage in or enjoy, that they were given pink toys and toys that were indicative of traditionally female interests or roles, whereas our male counterparts were encouraged to engage in math and science, and it was automatically assumed, therefore, that they would have capabilities in those areas, and that we, on the other hand, were not. So this goes back to another conversation that I had in a different video where I talked about the idea of the assumption of ignorance that affects all women, that when you enter into a conversation or a situation, a class, people in general automatically assume your ignorance on a topic, especially if it's a masculine coded topic. And resultingly, we have to then prove the falsity of that notion and prove ourselves worthy of even attaining a neutral kind of expectation from people and society itself, whereas men do not have to do that. They enter into a conversation with neutrality or with a positive kind of expectation on who they are and what they know. So yes, going through engineering school, I did face a number of demonstratively sexist actions and statements that did kind of corrode away my confidence. At that point in my life, I knew that that was something that I wanted to do and accomplish, so I fought against these negative voices telling me that I couldn't do something in order to achieve it, whereas the men were not told that. They were encouraged to perform well, whereas we were not. I've had teachers or professors who have literally said, if you want a good grade, bake the boys something, or you guys are only here to find husbands, or just dress a certain way and the men will help you. Of course, not even recognizing that the women in the class had higher grades than the men. I could literally go on and on and on. I was actually going to make a video just on the sexism in civil engineering that I personally faced. Even in an internship, it was so obvious that my male companion actually recognized it and called people out on it, because he's a great dude. Because in our internship, we had to give a presentation. He walked up, said his name, everyone clapped, they gave him respect and automatically assumed that he knew what he was talking about. He finished, more round of applause, I get up, say my name, dead silence. Nothing. They did not give me an ounce of respect, to the point where my companion literally turned. He was like 20 and these people were like in their 50s, men and women, and he turned to them and was like, "Aren't you gonna clap for her?" Like, he called them out on their apparent disrespect of me, that they gave him respect just because he was a man. It's just that level of absurdity that we're cognizant of, that we face every day, that men, for the most part, don't notice, but when it's that obvious, sometimes men are aware of it and they do stand up for us. And that was actually quite great. We did have some great, wonderful men in our classes that would say, like, you know, well, why don't the girls help you out? The girls know what they're doing. Why can't you ask them for help? Why does she have to go to the back of the room to ask the men for help? Why can't she ask other women for help? So essentially the point is just, this is microcosmic of a larger issue. It's anecdotal, I'm cognizant of that. But the idea is that our accomplishments are done having to fight through this mire of sexism which constantly puts us down and tells us that we don't know how to do something or that we can't do something, and we have to prove that we can. And it's hard, and it is debilitating, and it really gets to you mentally and physically to be constantly fustigated with this idea that you're lesser and that you don't know something. I've had other professors that say, like, I think it was Calculus C, and my professor was like, oh yeah, women just can't conceptualize it, so women's brains can't do it. It's just absurd, because they're operating off of these societally inculcated notions that have no evidentiary support. It's just assumptions, it's just falsity, it's just sexism and nothing else. So again, the point is, we have to try harder. So our accomplishments deserve to be considered and defined as demonstrative of empowerment and female empowerment, because we ascended, we surmounted these barriers to entry in spite of patriarchy. Okay, so now let's talk about when we do something in which we are legitimately at fault. So yeah, there will always be people, there will always be women and men who do not want to take accountability, that do not want to take responsibility, that want to blame everyone and their mother for something that they themselves did wrong. I'm not arguing against the existence of that. I am saying that is not specific to any gender, or that this thing is a man's fault specifically, and they're not willing to self-evaluate and ascertain the extent to which they themselves could be responsible. But I think what these people are talking about specifically is the propensity of women to blame men and to say, oh, I didn't achieve this because of a man, or this is a man's fault specifically. So I think this is very situational and very contextual. I can't say whether or not a woman is going to be at fault for something if I don't know what the situation is. Sometimes fault is very clearly defined, sometimes it's very nebulous, sometimes there are a multitude of things that contribute to something going awry. And given amongst a variety of different reasons and causes and people, we could be at fault to some extent, and someone else could be at fault for the rest. It's just very inherently complicated. So to say that women always blame men, I think is intrinsically fallacious. But to say that there's no cause to blame men, I think is also dependent on the circumstance. So what tendency do we have to blame men? In what situation are we blaming men? Because I think though self-evaluation is always necessary on the part of the person professing that it's men's fault, I think there could be something reciprocal in that, and that men should also self-evaluate to ascertain whether or not maybe they are at fault. And more so, I think this is the most difficult aspect of this, to try to ascertain whether or not systemic oppression, patriarchy, sexism intrinsic in different industries is the one at fault. And I know men do not want to do that. They don't want to admit that such things even exist in the first place, let alone try to understand the extent to which it is so pervasive, it's so ubiquitous, that it does have influence over our actions and over their actions and over the actions of people, whether they are conscious of it or not. And I think it's actually kind of the opposite. I think men have a tendency to be victim blaming and actually will be defensive of the men in the scenario, and instead hold the woman too much to account, to the point where I think they're being quite cruel and unfair. You know, it's a mentality of, what was she wearing? What did she say to him? I've been on social media sites and I've seen men literally defend men who have offed their spouses. And they will say, what did she do? And it doesn't matter. She was just divorcing him, or she just wanted some extra money, or something just comparatively trivial that doesn't matter in the context. No one deserves that end. It is demonstrative of male violence and domestic abuse, and they are defensive of it. So I think it's actually the opposite. If there's anyone that's not taking accountability and not being cognizant of the influence that patriarchy has over these situations, it's men, and not seeing on a grand scale the gestalt of what this does to women and what we have to contend with, that they also are not taking responsibility and they don't hold other men accountable for what they've done. If a man is harassing a woman, stand up to him. If your friends are making jokes about harming women, hold them accountable to it. You know, there's a lot of things that men can do to individually hold other men accountable and stop the pervasiveness of these sort of jokes and levity surrounding violence against women, which is a legitimate and incredibly disgustingly prevalent issue. Sorry, got a little heated. I feel very strongly about that topic, and I'm sorry to have gone down a darker path, but to bring it back, you could say something along the lines of, okay, this woman was fired. I mean, of course, it's possible that a woman could say, I did absolutely nothing wrong, the guy was just a sexist pig, he fired me just because of that. And granted, she could be misattributing her firing to this man and presumably sexism, when in actuality maybe she just isn't good at her job. There's definitely the possibility of that, and I'm not going to undermine that. Again, as I said, it's contextual. We need more information to make any kind of proclamation about something so general is intrinsically spurious. So yes, she could be at fault, but at the same time, we should look into that man and see what were his specific reasons. Maybe we find out that some guy had been harassing this woman and she told HR and they fired her and moved the man. That's happened so many times where women are forced to take responsibility for men harassing them at work. So again, it's so contextual and so context sensitive that we just can't make any kind of declarative statement on who is truly at fault. But the point is, be cognizant that patriarchy is in fact pervasive and that there are subconscious biases that could be influencing people's decisions, whether they are aware of it or not. For example, I like to refer to this study quite frequently, the idea of, I wish I could find it or link it, but the idea of doing blind auditions for an orchestra. So essentially, the people that are judging do not know whether or not the person is identifying as a male or a female when they audition for the seat in the orchestra. And literally, they found out that when they are completely blinded and unaware, it's 50-50. When they know, it's less. And I think they discovered that they could even tell that someone was a woman because they could hear the clack of their heels walking forward, and even that was sufficient enough to skew them away from the 50-50. So no, things are not meritocratic. As much as you like to profess that they are, people have biases. And just because it's not overt to you doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. We grow up being aware of these little instances in which we are not taken seriously as a result of our gender expression. And I am tired of it. So no, sir, I don't agree with your sentiment that women automatically assume that they're empowered when they do something good and don't take accountability when they do something wrong. I think it's decidedly more complicated than that, and you and everyone in the comment section who were talking about how women just don't take accountability, I think you're frankly quite wrong. And I believe the sentiments expressed are demonstrative of a truly shallow understanding of reality and what's going on around you to be able to say that women don't know how to take responsibility for something. And if our natural propensity is to blame men, just try to ask why. Just try to be curious about why we're saying that. Again, there could be veracity to it. She could just be blaming someone and not taking accountability because some people are like that just intrinsically, because people are people. but I would try to be a little bit more intellectually curious about it and to try to see, like, what is her argument? Why does she think that patriarchy or men have something to do with the fault, the situation? Just ask, try to accrue information, try to put together a narrative and context and better understand. That's just my rhetoric, is just try to listen and understand. Because your worldview is narrow, it's intrinsically narrow, there's so much more to it that you do not see or understand. So no, I don't believe that we're shirking responsibility or accountability for our actions. I think you are. I think, like everything in life, it's complicated, and you need to listen and have an open enough mind to understand that you don't know everything. You can't possibly know this situation. Maybe you'll never know. Maybe it's too nebulous. Maybe fault is an ill-defined. But the fact that you have the propensity to profess that all women do this, to make these generalized notions about us, that should tell you enough as it is. So I hope that clears some things up, that addresses this statement, this thought processes. If you want to comment and tell me what we need to be held accountable for, I'm open to knowing and to listening. And if you have an example, great. If you agree with me, great. Just put it in the comments and try to be kind and understanding and just conduct yourself as an intellectual. This is an intellectual query and discussion. Try to keep personal emotions out of it. Okay? Try to respect other people, and we can engage in a really interesting conversation about this incredibly difficult topic. Thanks. I'll see you soon.